Okay. Hi, Shirley. Nice to see
Hi,
you. Happy New Year.
nice, nice to see you
I think
too. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. I thought maybe we could spend some time just talking about adoption, which is something we both share of and is of interest, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yes, we both know a lot about that subject.
We have worked with people and we've both written. And so I was going to sort of ask you about your book, Forever Families, and sort of what inspired you to write this book.
I happen to have a copy of it right here, Forever
Fabulous.
Families,
I do like
which
the cover. I
where
love it. And what's on the sort of the writing itself?
well,
Like
it's
a
very
tip,
much the idea of the parent holding the child's hand, or sort of that
right?
that caring, and but also that connection. And we have words like childhood, relationship, education, friendship, parenthood, challenges, privacy, understanding, attachment, all those words that come up in this space, and siblings and celebration, acceptance, bond, it's creating that bond between in a new family from the child from one family coming and parents from another family and those coming together and trying to create that bond and feel like this new family that's being created.
Right. There's a lot around coming together, isn't it? And all those words you listed sounds to me very much as and there probably would be more as well in terms of sort of just what we need to be sort of thinking around about adoption, but also, in terms of the work we do, both as therapists ourselves. There's clearly a lot, we can bring to this thinking.
Yes, and I mean, I myself have adopted, and I know many adopted people. And so one of the things was to kind of, there are these stories that adopters know about, but other people don't know what that looks like behind the scenes. So there are many challenges in adoption, as well as a lot of love and giving homes to people and creating a loving family. But there's also many challenges, and people talk about those. But when you see a family in the park and the child is behaving a certain way, you think the parent is deficient. You don't know that child has had trauma from birth. So it's those things where it's private, but we raise our kids in public space, in communities, in schools and churches and shopping centers, etc., where people make a judgment without knowing what might be going on behind, or
Mm,
what that child, or how far that family has come as well. So
mm,
you may start off with very difficult, that the child doesn't even want to go outside, and then you may get to a point where they're playing with friends, and that's an achievement. So
mm.
it's also monitoring the small steps that everyone takes, the child, the parents, the family, of coming together and feeling like, that connected, loving unit.
So I mean, this talk would be very useful for people who are not even adopters. In addition to people who parents who've adopted and adoptees and, local authority, I think, it touches on everyone's life, really, back to the
Yes, I
saying,
mean,
it takes a village to raise a child.
it does take a village to raise a child. And one of the things many adopters find is that they need a community, a sense of community. They need a support, a kind of people around you caring for you or looking after you or making you feel that you're doing, encouraging you when there are difficulties, but also celebrating when things go well. So that people who can connect to the minutiae of progress, which might be small steps, but
Mm.
over a period, it's like everything in life. You think you can't get to somewhere, and then over a period, you look back and the journey has been incredible. A lot has improved. But having that community to hold you when things are not going so well, that's really important. And that could be friendships. It could be, I think for many people I know, you have friends before you adopt, and then with people you have things in common with, and then you become an adopter and you find your kids and their kids may not get on, and that happens with regular other people as well. So a lot of this is not particularly special, but it's just dialed up a bit. It's just a little bit more intense in the adoption space. And so
Mm.
then you're making new friends with other parents who have also adopted and understand that extra bit that you're dealing with, which
Mm.
is often hard to explain because,
Mm.
of course, all parenting can be challenging, and
Mm.
people then start competing for, well, I have this problem. Oh, you have that problem. Well, mine is and you start
What's my
competing.
problem different to your problem, kind of
Yes,
thing. So
yes.
let's delve in. Let's delve into why it's so different. And just get back to your book. When you were choosing the families and stories to include, so what actually guided you in making those decisions?
Well, we wanted to, myself and this charity who supports parents, we wanted to gather some stories to inform and educate both potential adopters, but prospective adopters, but also local authorities and social services and education. So it was that, having that impact. And we gathered as many stories as we could, to be fair, because we thought it would be nice to have for people who are doing well and people who are not doing well. It's nice to give that broad, these examples of their different experiences and their different stages of people, younger kids and young teens and people who remember adopting years ago and have the odd adult. So mostly it's the younger years and there are a few teens. But so, yes, so as many as we could get hold of in the time that we needed, but that we knew that was reliable information, people we'd known, friends, contacts of contacts. So people, so this was never mass marketed or mass advertised. It's through the charity and people who have reached out for support and people who have connected in that way. And also it is people who have reached out for support over the years. So for some people, there are people who are adopted and never reach out for support or reach out somewhere else or have enough extended family and friends to support them. So I guess in that way, it's self-selecting. It's people who had connected the charity or myself or the other author. So between us, we gather the people that we knew.
Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking it might be worth mentioning the other author, who is Zovia.
Yes, she works for the charity.
Right.
So she runs a number of parenting support groups. And so she's had that experience with the charity. And I've had a similar experience with the charity, but I'm not employed by them. I'm employed as a counsellor and a coach, and I write as well. So we brought different experiences to it, which made it a more interesting.
No, I mean, it sounds fabulous because you've got different ages and you've got, people who come to you. So, it's not like you're having to go to them in a way. It gives a different narrative, doesn't it? Are there any stories at all that sort of, stayed with you that you want to kind of talk about?
There's so many interesting things. A lot of it is there's repetition as well, because a lot of people have challenges in primary school. So you have your child, you bring them to primary school, and then something happens either with the staff or with other peers. So one of the things that I always find difficult is people who have had 7-year-old being excluded or a 6-year-old being excluded, or because of some incident that was not handled well, because the school is not trauma informed, that doesn't, that don't believe that there is anything different about this adopted child. And those things are quite, well, not so shocking because I've heard it before, but still is very sad, because imagine starting school. I mean, my school years were so wonderful. I love school. I'm thinking that you're 5, 6, 7 and you're being excluded for a week because we can't cope with you. And I'm not saying I don't have an answer for it, because they haven't been prepared for what this child has brought, because no one has looked ahead of it. And maybe that's the problem, is looking ahead of, how do you support adopted children and families from nursery, from birth, if you can, from getting into, so they arrive and the school knows how to handle situations when they come up and they have ways of dealing with behavior or attachment issues or things on the playground, or they have solutions and they can put those into action, rather than the solution being, oh, we'll send this child home because we don't know what to do. And that saddens me every time. And we have a few examples.
That's really quite sad, because I mean, just on that note, of course, adopted children come with different challenges. We know, that the kind of, what gets transmitted in utero would have sort of effects on them, as well as, genes and stuff, as well as the fact that they've already, been given up before. But also, I'm just thinking about the education system and just back to what we said about, it takes a village. And, I don't think you're kind of excusing the school, but there is something about, the Senko and, the school being up to, in terms of sort of dealing with, the neurodivergence, that range of children that we have. I don't know what your thoughts are, because you mentioned this trauma informed. Would you say that is something that you feel that should be partly, because, what is trauma? I think everyone's experienced trauma in some form or the other, even just giving birth is a form of trauma. So, I'm wondering whether schools ought to be more up to date and up to speed with, just and also children that are, a lot of children these days have been diagnosed with ADHD. Is this a sort of something of our environment, or is it something that, those children are born with? I mean, these are questions we really need to be asking ourselves, and in terms of sort of, supporting children, both parents and schools, and how much more better informed, I guess, is the question that I'm wondering what the schools need to be.
Yes, I mean, I think without this is hard for
It is
everybody.
hard, isn't it? Because we don't want to portion blame, do we?
No, this is hard for everyone. Schools have a lot of targets and things that they have to do. Teachers are overwhelmed with numbers and protocols and things that they have to, and levels that they have to get the kids to be moving on. So if this person is not attending or paying attention, you mentioned ADHD, and falling behind in their reading and not hitting the key stage levels, then the schools have to feel they have to answer for that and explain for that, or not wanting to keep the other kids slow it down because the ones at the front are getting ready for the next level. So there's a lot of juggling and a lot of balancing that has to be done. And I guess maybe it's about being honest with the parents as well and saying these are the challenges. Let's try and work together to see how we can resolve this. What support can you find? What support can we put in place? How might this look for us? And really having those conversations maybe earlier on. So, for some of us, we may have just had one child and we've only had one adopt. So it's not that it's your second or your third and you have a sense of how this works in schools and how that might happen. If you've only got one, you have nothing to compare it to. Perhaps if it's your second child, you might have an idea of how to do it. And there are stories, whether it's in the book or with clients that I have, where one Senko is great and they're fantastic, but the head or the deputy head doesn't understand the needs. There's another place where the Senko is not great and doesn't know which forms to fill in and what to do. But the deputy head or the head management is good, but they can't deal with the day-to-day. So you have this mix in different institutions where not everyone is up to speed. And perhaps what might be useful is if the person who is most up to date hosts a session for the rest of their colleagues in one of the insets and say, look, this is what we need to know about working with adopted kids or foster kids or kids with some sort of trauma, and this is how we can do it. And I know where we can get more training or more CPD, or we can have a guest person come in and do that. So that sharing of information may be allowing people who may be more senior than you to say they don't know. There's a lot of ego and lack of vulnerability as well. The head to say, well, I don't know this, but the Senko can lead on this one. Even though I'm the boss of the school, I'll allow you to, because you know more about this, and I'll sit and listen. And that sort of interplay would be really useful to lift the knowledge of everyone in the school.
Because we are both learning from one another.
Yeah.
And I guess this also talks to what it is we're trying to do here. I'm just thinking about this trauma informed in terms of sort of, people who are wanting to, adopt or just what we're kind of really talking about that children, come up with. And maybe we may cover this in the questions that's going to come up. So what I was also thinking of asking is, how do you see therapy or mental health support fitting into this adoption journeys? I mean, what can we do as practitioners, in supporting supporting families and children?
Yes, I mean it's from so many different angles, isn't it? But certainly I work with parents, and I know myself I have also been supported, and it's really the parents is not taking things personally when the kid does not want to connect with you, or is rejecting of you, or any of those things, because it takes a while to bond, and that's a bumpy road, and they need to know that you really are, we called it forever families, and they need to know you're forever and you won't abandon them again. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, the parent has to be resourceful, resilient,
Mm-hmm.
self aware, but also compassionate, for self compassion as well. Because
That
if
they're
you're
gonna get it wrong,
you're going to get
but
it
it's
wrong. We're
okay.
not perfect.
Yes.
And also, self care, because there's a lot of putting yourself out there for the child to pick up or drop, because they
Mm.
may not be in the mood to connect today. You might have taken a day off to have a nice day of fun with them, and like, well, I don't fancy it. I want to be on with strangers online.
Mm.
So it's being very gentle on yourself and the children in that sense. So I lost my train, but for the adult to look after themselves.
But yeah, and I think you're also saying that, just being accepting of the child, because the child comes with their own things.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
sometimes it's about the parent wanting to mold the child into the child that the wish they've had, or the child that they would like to have, or whatever it is that's been transmitted. But to see the child for what the child is, and they're going to display all sorts of, and not to take it personally, because it's really about, the child and what they come with.
Yes, I mean,
If
and that's
I'm
the
making
same.
myself clear on that.
Well, that's the same for all parents, where we parents want to think they're creating mini me's. And I guess if it's a birth child, you may recognize a bit of yourself in them, or your partner, or your parents, or something, some things skip a generation. So you might notice some of that. If it's a child you've adopted,
Mhm.
you won't notice any family traits in them. But of course, there are human traits that we all have
Or
access.
that they may end up adopting as well, of the
So
adopt.
there is that whole nature nurture, and you get to see that live if you're someone like me who's paying, so noting things and paying attention.
Mm.
But yes, it's this gem, this is this unknown, and you
Yeah,
curiosity is
yeah,
really what you need. Notice who is the child that you actually have, and
exactly.
also nothing to do with your childhood, because
Mm.
that's ancient history. The
Mm.
child you have now in 2026, in a time of global whatever, and social media
Challenges.
challenges, and trying to find what is this world that they're in, especially if they're coming of age now, or they're teenagers now, and they're hearing things, seeing things, glancing things on the internet, and this child is navigating something completely different. And that's the same for birth kids as adopted kids, but adopted kids is just another layer on their
Can you talk to me about the
separation.
layer? Because I think there is a layer, isn't there?
Yes, it's that extra. So you have the challenges that your birth children have, but also it's like, but you're not my birth family. But I've got relatives somewhere out there, and I don't know where they are. I don't have access to them. But
Mm.
also, as adopted parents, we know access to them may not be helpful if you're at a developmental age, and
Mm.
if they may be not positive influences. And so but there's just a lot of unknowns
There is a
for the
lot of
parent
unknown.
and for the child, and
Yeah.
sort of parenting in that space of unknown. And one day they may connect to the birth family, maybe sooner than later, depending on the individual story. I know
Mm.
some young kids who have connections to the birth family, and I know some older ones who don't. So it's
Yeah.
not an age thing necessarily; it's a circumstance of all parties involved. But there's that unknown as to what, when, how
Mm.
soon, for how long, what might that mean, how will that influence them? They
Mm.
don't know. The children don't know. The parents don't know. It's a sort of step by step, slowly kind of exploring things as it becomes possible.
Mm. Mm. And this is why I love your title, actually, because it is about the forever. of it, isn't it? That with adopted children that, having suffered an experience of loss before, and then, sort of the challenge often is the sense of, being given up again, and the sort of notion of this, this is a forever job, and so whatever they do, because I think they will always act out. And whatever they do is knowing that, they're now in a sort of forever family, I guess. And what you've been saying is that, not to take anything too personally, because it's not about that. It's not about it's about the child. So, being able to
Yes,
cover,
yeah. And
really.
there is a need, there is a sort of, I mean, teenagers will test their parents anyway, and adopted teens will test even more because are you sure you really love me? Are you sure you
Exactly.
want to be my family forever? You know, they left. Why did you choose me? Why do you want to be my whatever, mom or dad or family? So there is that testing and pushing away to see, will you be there? Will you really be there? And of course, if you don't want to, abandonment at this point will be devastating. So there is a seeing it through to helping children become adults and yes, and hopefully successful adults. But yeah, there are many risks for many kids. Nature, nurture.
There are, and of course, adoption does break up, and again, it's not really a fault thing. And I work with quite a lot of adoptees and as well as adopted parents, and one of the things that I feel, a bit like the work we do, the people that come to us and end up staying with us for years and years, they really literally become like your child, especially when the sort of adoption hasn't gone well, and you kind of want to kind of repair, which is part of the work we do. But it's even more than that. It's almost like you really carry them like your child, wanting to know how they're getting on and try and rebuild something of the person, that they are. There's a lot of holding, I guess, is the point
Yes,
I
yes,
find.
yes. There is a lot of holding,
Mm,
and I mean there is that for many clients in different
mm,
ways, but
mm,
and you really wanting to encourage people to know that they're okay, know that they're enough, explore their inner world, whoever they are now, and have that self-love, self-compassion, self-care, that they are worthy of being looked after, regardless of the early start, regardless of being abandoned, that they are still worth that care and that love, and they deserve a good life, and trying to support them to navigate. And relationships tend to be very difficult because of course you've had these relationships where people have abandoned you or avoided you, or you couldn't, and peer relationships can be tricky as well. Young people can be quite harsh with each other, and so then you get into adulthood with not enough friends, and work becomes difficult. So you can be there's so many isolated people, and this is regardless of birth or adopted, but just people who've this checkered childhood and this checkered past trying to become a fully fledged adult. And I think all of that is what we can be holding for people as well, just helping them to feel whole and gather their bits together and know that they're okay.
And I guess maybe what you're saying also is that, of course, the it's very similar for any parent, all this sort of different transition that the child goes through, secondary school and then, moving on. But one of the things that I hear you say about the adopted child is actually the fact that, this transition is also sort of slightly perhaps more challenging, I guess, for them, and where the Holden comes in, because the sort of challenges that they carry in terms of sort of personality and things. I think we've talked about bonding and early trauma and patterns that you've noticed in families. What sort of support did adoptive families say they hoped for most?
One of the things that kept coming up from the questions that we did with our families was wanting to be believed, because there are lots of times when people went to their social worker or their education lead or the psychologist, and they're being questioned as if they are the problem.
Right.
So at the beginning, they're having to say, demonstrate, I am not, this child needs help. We have done this and we need more help. I'm like, but have you done it this way? But do you know? And being sort of questioned as if they are the problem.
As if they're not doing it right.
As if they're not doing it right, as if they're not aware that they should be practicing PACE or therapeutic parenting or all the various things that they would have done through the preparation to adopt.
Can you tell us what PACE is again? Just a reminder.
PACE is, what is PACE now? It's the way of looking off it's therapeutic parenting, and it is, oh gosh, I forgot it. Acceptance and compassion is what I can remember now. What's the P for?
It stands for something. This is
playfulness.
When we use all this abbreviation and then we forget what the abbreviation actually stands for, but we're actually practicing it, aren't we?
Yes, we're practicing it, but it's being loving in as many places as you can, but it's playfulness, acceptance, and of course acceptance is huge, because you accept the child, they're able to feel comfortable in their own skin and grow from that. If they're not being accepted, then they will not be able to grow and expand. So playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and again, curiosity is a thread through everything, because the child will change and grow and things come in and you have behavior that you don't understand, but be curious. This is a new thing. What's happened? Where did
that's a big part of it, isn't it? The curiosity.
Yes, because it continues. And for us, it's also part of the work we do with clients. So luckily for me, I can do it in whether it's in the family role or in another space. But it's that, what does that behavior mean? What is it? Because, they say behavior is always communication. So if it's bad behavior, it's communication.
Yes,
what is it trying to say? And I find for myself, it's also being interested in when it's good as well, because so often parents just want to know what's the bad thing to fix it, and when it's good, you take your attention off. Fine now.
You take it for granted because I guess the behavior you want. You're like, oh yeah, this child's behaving normal now, but actually for the child is actually remembering to praise them for
exactly. It's a big deal, and celebrate that as well, and also notice, well, how is that? Why is that okay now? What's changed here?
Absolutely. There's a lot of vigilance that this takes, doesn't it? And the E part of it is
empathy.
Empathy, that's right.
Yeah.
Well remembered.
Empathy.
And this is not a test. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You practice it anyway. So, it's how it is. Funding. There's never enough funding.
Well,
and there's a lot of cutbacks. And, like you're saying, people need to prove they need the money.
Well, even that's just proving you need the help. There is less funding now, and there is a whole campaign to try to get the government to not reduce the funding, which I think they have done now. But so it's funding for assessments. So many adopted kids need to be assessed and diagnosed to find out what. So the parent has a child who has issues. School said there are issues we can't help. But what are the issues? How do we define it? So you need to then have a diagnosis to know, is it ADHD? Is it autism? Is it PDA, demand avoidance one? Is it sensory processing? Is it FASD, which is the fetal alcohol? What is it? And some of it is about the experience in the womb, and others of it might be personality and nature from genetic thing.
Nature and nurture.
Yes.
Inheritance.
It's probably not yet the nurture. It's probably more the nature, the biological makeup of whether it's someone has autism, ADHD. You might find a birth parent might have one or other of those. So, but this new family maybe doesn't. So they don't recognize autism because it wasn't in. But this child may have that. So But it's being assessed and diagnosed. So then you have the label, which means you can have the EHC. I think you can get an EHCP without it, but anyway, it makes it clear some of what the needs are now. If you say there is, as well as maybe learning challenges or just a little bit behind, or dyslexia or different things, you might also say and autism or and ADHD or and sensory. So, and then even getting that might be difficult, as particularly around, look, there was just been waiting lists and waiting lists and waiting lists at 1
What's
year,
going
2
on
year.
with all this waiting list? Because I know there's lots of children on the adoption register. Surely it should be in, the interest of local authorities, which I think it is, and government to, place children within, homes, because it's not going to, in the longer term. I mean, I think the ideal, I would have thought, is so that they, and I know people are waiting to adopt, but the process, it seems to take so long.
I'm not sure if that's still, I know there was a time when there was a lot of people were waiting a long time to adopt. I think demand may have dropped a bit, and it may be that the process is not as long as it used to be. That's my
Right.
understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But the waiting list now that I'm aware of is the one to be assessed. So there are not enough psychologists and people doing those assessments for parents who have adopted. So, I mean, I guess there are quite a few different waiting lists, but once you have the child, then you need to find a way to assess if there are needs, what are those needs? How do you identify those needs? And then how do you get therapy or help for those needs? So then getting access to play therapists or occupational therapy or psychologists, that's another stage, or CAMS when they become a bit older, probably. So again, CAMS has a waiting list for regular adopted, every child. A lot of children would go through CAMS. So it's waiting lists all over. There's sometimes you can go private if you can find the money and or find a practitioner. Not everyone can do that. Specifically with adopted parents, often one parent, if you have a two-parent family, which is not a given, but if you do at some point, if there is a lot of challenges, then maybe one parent has to go part-time or even give up work altogether to deal with the admin and the meetings and the being sent home early and all of that. It's not possible
And
to
it
leave
sounds, as you put it, it sounds quite costly,
So there is a
which
loss of
then puts a
income.
lot of people off, doesn't it? And
Yes, there is
that it
a
really
loss of
should
income.
not be the objective.
No, I mean, if you have to go part-time or you have to be at home with an 8-year-old who's been sent home, for example, then there is a loss of income. And then if you've got to pay privately to have assessment, that's a spending that is different from what it might have been. And having said that, there are many people who know that adoption has stretched them, but they've grown a lot themselves, and there is a benefit to it, and they can see a maturing young person. So it's challenging, and like most things in life, when you there's a challenge, but when you get there, there's a wow, look
It's
at what we've
rewarding,
done.
isn't it? Is
There's
what
a
you're
reward
saying.
as well.
Yeah,
So
which is
it's not
fantastic.
all trying to really give a
It's
balanced
worthwhile,
picture.
but then
Yeah.
it's also worthwhile for the parent or the person to have an understanding of their capacity.
Yes, there is being resilient before is helpful, but if not, you will become resilient through the
Whichever
process.
way you look at it, do you see what I mean? But I'm wondering whether, some of the support might possibly be needed earlier on, and also sort of support for the child. I don't know what you think about that, but I mean, they do the CPR and they have all the different checks. So, I'm keeping in mind those people that might want to adopt, because for me, that would be really where I would like to see us move to, because I also know that, a lot of Black boys are within the register, and they don't get chosen. They don't get chosen by Black families, and they don't get chosen by white families. So it's a bit of a challenge. But I wonder whether, if there's a bit more money put into the system from somewhere, somebody else that might think this is a really good venture to invest in, maybe we could increase people who are willing to do it. And when I say money, in terms of sort of finding out what the needs of the child is, I know between the age of 1 and 2 or 3, you can't really tell, but maybe you could tell certain things so that, we can begin to put some help in place or therapy in place. I don't know what you think for the parents, sort of kind of ongoing support before things get to a crescendo and crisis stage where, adoption breaks down.
I mean, absolutely. Well, as therapists, we probably feel that everyone should have therapy. So that's a given.
Absolutely. A long lifetime commitment. Why not? It's
Yes.
somewhere you could go and have conversations.
Yes. And also parents also need a place that they can go and talk about the challenges of raising a child, whether they're adopted parents or not, just that challenge of having to look after someone else, having to think about all the things that they have, all the dangers, trying to keep them as safe as you can to get them to adulthood with all the things that they don't understand what the dangers are. So certainly early therapy is good for everyone who wants it, and it would help the parents to really be more secure. Because I mean, one of the things, and we would have done this in our training, is go through our own childhood and eventually see our parents as adults, as individuals. They were our parents, but we see them as flawed, whole humans. And many people haven't done that. Many adults haven't looked back at their childhood and the lessons learned and all that, how it shaped them, where their choices are, where they doing this just because their parents did it, and where they choose to be an adult because of who they've found themselves to be. So a lot of that can help resource you for becoming a parent, because you really know you stand in your own truth and your own growth. Yeah. So there is that. And of course, play therapy, and just for the kids, just being able to learn to get along with other kids and learning to a sense
how do you talk to children?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, asking a child, how are you and how was your day? Fine. How do you interact with them?
So that's
it's not a question. It's just when you mention play therapy.
Yes, and that is what the parent-child thing can happen as well. So whether you offer the adult therapy before they adopt, and then after they adopt, they can do the play therapy with the child, and they can be supported in that interaction and that bonding. So that could be the next level. And then eventually the child will be old enough to have their own space as and when they need it. So they understand the idea of going to therapy and speaking to somebody and being supported. And this is all in the sense of they may not be grandparents who understand this. They may not be the extended family. So in another space, another culture, another time, there might be, you can go to this favorite aunt who was like a therapist because they liked you and they always gave you a space, or this grandparent who gave you a nice, you escaped from your family, your parents' house, and you went there and you felt seen and heard and looked after. So, this is a modern day way of giving people a spaces to be nurtured and spaces to be held and to feel safe and all of those things, because schools can be competitive, other young people's groups can be competitive, and it's just giving them more spaces where you're seen, you're okay as you are. I care about you. Tell me what's going on with you. And that's really important.
I really like that idea. And, I don't think it's talked about enough, the spaces. And I'm also very aware that, for a lot of us parents, we just don't have the spaces, It's fortunate to have grandparents, and it's fortunate to have grandparents that live close by enough to be able to say, or grandparents that even want your children, and it goes on.
Yes, and especially if you've adopted, not every culture understands that. Not everybody will be able to connect to this younger generation, particularly if they're of a different culture in a different place and they've come from a different background. So you may find that they are grandparents, but they don't know how to, relate, or maybe there aren't any grandparents. So, there's so many, we're trying to be so very inclusive and speak to all possibilities, and there are many. But I guess, if you have the support you need, and if there are spaces for you to feel supported and for your kids to feel safe and supported, and if something's missing, then it's trying to see, how can I expand my circle? How can I add more people in?
It is important, isn't it?
Yes.
That support network. And I know that they do ask for that. Can I just ask you, as we're sort of coming to the end, and this is a question that sort of stayed in my mind through the talk, is something around the needs of adopted children. We've kind of circled around it. And, is it that often or not, that they have what you call this neurodivergence that's been branded around challenges at the moment? I mean, is that sort of something that they come with? Is it nurture and nature? We talked about it, but what your thoughts are?
I mean, it's probably a longer and a new conversation, but there seems to be an overlap with different learned neurodivergent needs, whether that's ADHD or autism. There is some, I've discussed it with someone else who's more skilled in autism than I am, that some parts of that and trauma can look similar. So what we're doing is we're talking about kids who are young and maybe when they're 20 and they've gone through adolescence and they've gone through navigating education system, it may settle into a different thing as an adult. But at the moment, it seems that there is a high overlap between adopted kids and those neurodivergent diagnoses. We're not looking at a percentage of all the adopted kids because nobody, what is that figure? I don't know. But the people I do know who are in the book and who I've spoken to, there is something, as well as dyslexia is very common, as well as demand avoidance, which again might be linked to trauma. And I don't know enough about demand avoidance, but as well as sensory, which might be linked to body stuff, which might be part of the experience in the womb. So, and of course, the alcohol syndrome stuff, which is to do with how they were treated in the womb as well. So some of it might be lifelong and others of it might just be growing stuff that when they find their place in the world, that place where they belong and they feel safe, it might just sort of, be regular. So it's hard to, there's probably more studies.
It's hard to pin it down, but I also think maybe what you're also saying is there is the CPR, which is, I don't remember what it stands for. I don't know if you do.
I don't know.
Yeah, but they carry this out to sort of assess the child, don't they, and the parents, and so about what the child has inherited, and the situation around the parents, the birth parents, and the challenges, and whatever diagnosis they might have. So there is that, and then I think they carry out some sort of medical assessment as well for the child. So I guess to some extent, the adoptive parents find out some of the sort of inherent things that the child could potentially have. And in my mind, I'm kind of just thinking, I think people just need to arm themselves with as much knowledge as possible. So, you can't really be prepared, even if one has their own biological child. They could come up with things that are very unexpected. But it seems, I think, is also the fact that the children that end up getting that are adopted have experienced different things in the womb, which ends up being some of the difficulties.
Yes, I mean, just a couple of points on that while I'm thinking. You may get some of the information, you may get all the information. So that was one of the things that came up in the book. People were saying they felt they weren't given all the information. Now, sometimes the local authority don't have all the information. That's the other thing. They only have what their parents might tell them.
Yes, if they're actually present or yeah.
There might just be one parent that they can get in contact with. Maybe it's just the mother, so they don't know anything else about the other parent, possibly. Mm-hmm. So you get what they have. Oftentimes they'll give you all of it, whether, there are people who say they didn't. But there is that. There is also the knowledge that what happens in the womb is important, even if you adopt a baby. So that's a bit of information that people think if you get a baby, then it doesn't matter. But it still is. Their experience of the being in the mother's womb is still
and mothering, I guess, to some extent. Well, the question, when is a baby born, comes into my mind.
The experience in the womb, it matters. The child would have absorbed that, especially if the mother was anxious or, not sleeping or as well as eating and drinking the wrong stuff for the system, but also just the routines of if a mother was beaten up, that baby would have had that experience being in a womb as well. So all kinds of experiences. There's a point earlier on I forgot to mention that to support adoptive parents would also be useful to get respite. So if you're a foster parent, you get respite, you get paid and you get respite.
Yes.
And if you're an adoptive parent, there's no one to help you. There's no support that is official unless you are completely, it's broken down practically. There's nothing that's bad enough to get respite if it's still an ongoing thing, as well as no funding for a lot of it. So yeah, you might
more
get
funding basically.
More funding in some ways, but
more
respite is a different. It's also knowing that as well as foster parents wanting respite, adoptive parents may not forever, maybe at difficult points, especially if a child, for example, is excluded and is home and the parents not being able to do different things, then it may be being able to have respite once a term, once a month, something. But if you're saying there'll never be any respite until
it's quite quite hard going, isn't it?
It can be, and it just allows, and it doesn't mean parents have to use it, but just that it's a possibility. But there is no system, I think, to consider that adoptive parents might need some respite at some point, whereas foster parents would get it.
Yes, that's really a very
and it's the same
point.
Similar kids
that they need respite as well. Right. Yes. Just one last question or thought. If you could give one key piece of advice to adoptive parents considering therapy, what would it be?
Do it.
Perfect.
Do it, because it's not about getting anything wrong. It's not about being need to be fixed. It's not about any of that. It's a space to really connect with who you are, what's supporting you, what you need, how you can be supported, and just to flourish, as we were talking about earlier, just to know how you can, despite the challenges, that you could still have a whole, fulfilled life, and what might that look like. And you get a space to kind of work through that with someone else who is impartial and non-judgmental and want to hold up the best for you. So yeah, I'd say that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really enriching, covered so much. So, and I'm sure it's going to be kind of very helpful and useful to a lot of people. So thank you for your contribution.
Thanks for having me. Yes, so we're ready to see all the adoptive parents, and they can come to us and be supported in whatever stage they are in the journey, which is great.
Right. When you say us, where is us now? Do you want to kind of just say that?
Well, I'm in vision counseling, so
actually to both of us really is what you're also saying. Yeah. Fabulous.